The house was perfect. After months of renovations, choosing paint colors, hunting for furniture, and agonizing over every tiny detail, it finally felt like a home. Our home. I'd spent countless hours on this space, pouring in not just money but heart and soul. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of what I thought my marriage to Daniel could be. A partnership. A place where we could start fresh and build something beautiful together. That's why, when he casually dropped the bomb over dinner, it felt like a slap in the face. "So, Greg's going to stay with us for a while," he said, spearing a piece of chicken with his fork. "You know, just until he gets back on his feet." I blinked at him, not sure I'd heard him right. "Greg? Your friend? The one going through the divorce?" "Yeah," Daniel said, chewing like it was no big deal. "He needs a place to crash, and he's bringing his dog too." I put my fork down, my appetite evaporating. "How long is a while?" He shrugged. "Until further notice." My name is Julia, and I'm 36 years old. For the past year, I've been pouring my energy into this house. It wasn't just about renovations. It was about creating a sanctuary, a place where Daniel and I could finally settle down and start the next chapter of our lives. But over the years, I'd started to notice a troubling pattern. Daniel had a habit of making decisions, big ones, without consulting me. Whether it was switching jobs, planning vacations, or apparently inviting his recently divorced best friend to live with us indefinitely, my opinion was always an afterthought. He'd brush off my concerns with a casual, "It's fine," or "We'll figure it out." And each time I'd let it go, convincing myself it wasn't worth the fight. This time, though, it felt different. The house was supposed to be our space, the one place where I thought I'd finally have a say. And yet, here we were, with Daniel unilaterally deciding to upend our lives. Again. "Daniel," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "don't you think we should have talked about this first? This is a huge decision." He looked at me like I'd just suggested something ridiculous. "Why? It's my house, too. I don't need your permission to help my best friend." I felt my stomach knot. "This isn't just about Greg. We've just finished moving in, we're finally settling down, and now you're inviting someone else to live with us indefinitely? What about his dog? What about our space? This affects both of us." Daniel sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Look, it's not a big deal. Greg's going through a rough time, and I'm not going to abandon him. He's my best friend. You'd do the same if it were one of your friends." "That's not the point," I said, my voice sharper now. "The point is, you didn't ask me. You just decided, and now I'm supposed to go along with it like I don't have a choice?" "It's my house too, Julia," he snapped, his tone turning defensive. "And my decision is final." The words hung in the air like a punch to the gut. My decision is final. Not our decision. My decision. In that moment, it was painfully clear. He didn't see me as an equal partner. He saw me as someone who'd adjust, compromise, and bend to whatever he wanted. And the worst part? He expected me to accept it without a fight. I stared at him across the table, my heart pounding. Every fiber of my being wanted to explode, to yell, to tell him exactly how wrong he was. But instead, I forced myself to take a deep breath. If there was one thing I'd learned over the years, it was that arguing with Daniel rarely led to anything productive. He'd dig in his heels, double down, and turn the blame back on me. So I did something I hadn't done before. I stayed quiet. "Okay," I said finally, my voice calm but icy. "If that's how you feel." Daniel frowned, clearly expecting more of a reaction. "That's it?" I nodded. "That's it." I cleared the table without another word, retreating to the bedroom as Daniel sat back down and turned on the TV. My hands shook as I loaded the dishwasher, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. He thought he'd won. He thought I'd let this go, just like I always did. But this time, he was wrong. That night, as Daniel slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The house I'd spent months building didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a stage for someone else's decisions, someone else's rules. And if I didn't take a stand now, it would only get worse. A plan began to form in the back of my mind. Small at first, but growing with every passing moment. I wasn't going to yell or beg or try to change his mind. I was going to show him what it meant to make a decision without considering someone else. When he arrived with Greg and that dog, they'd find out just how final my decisions could be. I spent the next few days quietly setting my plan in motion. Daniel didn't suspect a thing. Why would he? He'd made it clear he thought his word was law, and as usual, he assumed I'd fall in line. But this time, I wasn't backing down. I'd spent too much time, effort, and energy creating this home to let it become someone else's crash pad. No questions asked. The first step was the locks. I called a locksmith while Daniel was at work, explaining that I wanted all the exterior locks replaced. "It's a precaution," I told the man, forcing a polite smile as he drilled away. He didn't need to know the details, and frankly, I wasn't ready to admit to anyone what had pushed me to this point. When the job was done, I held the new keys in my hand, feeling a flicker of power I hadn't felt in months. Step 2 was reclaiming the space inside. I walked through the house, taking stock of everything that screamed Daniel's decisions. The oversized recliner he insisted on keeping, the ugly coffee table his mother gave us, the ridiculous sports memorabilia cluttering the walls. I moved it all into the garage. By the time I was done, the house looked different. Lighter. Mine. Lauren came over that evening to help finalize the details of my counterplan. She'd been my best friend since college, the one person who always told me the truth, even when it was hard to hear. "You're really going through with this?" she asked, lounging on the freshly cleared couch. "Absolutely," I said, pouring 2 glasses of wine. "He wants to make unilateral decisions? Fine. Let's see how he likes it when I do the same." Lauren grinned, raising her glass. "I love this for you. But seriously, what's your endgame? What happens when he shows up with Greg and the dog?" I took a sip of wine, savoring the moment. "I'll let them know that this is still my house, too. They can either respect my boundaries or they can figure out another plan. I'm done bending over backward for Daniel's nonsense." The next step was preparing for their arrival. I had no intention of turning Greg away outright. I knew it wasn't his fault that Daniel had overstepped. But I wasn't going to roll out the welcome mat either. I set up the guest room with the bare minimum: a mattress, a single pillow, and an old blanket. No extra comforts, no space for the dog, nothing that screamed "make yourself at home." If Daniel wanted to play the generous host, he could do it without my help. Meanwhile, I packed a small bag of Daniel's things, just the essentials, and left it by the front door. It wasn't a threat, exactly. It was a reminder that this was my home too, and I wouldn't hesitate to protect it if he continued to ignore my voice. The real pièce de résistance was the letter. I spent hours drafting it, making sure every word hit exactly the way I wanted. It wasn't an angry rant. That wasn't my style. It was calm, clear, and firm, laying out exactly how I felt and what I expected moving forward. "Daniel," it read, "this house is our shared home, which means decisions about it should be made together. By inviting Greg to live here without consulting me, you dismissed my feelings and undermined our partnership. I won't tolerate being treated as an afterthought in my own home. If Greg stays here, it will be under my conditions, not yours. And if you can't respect that, you're free to leave." I printed the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and taped it to the front door. It was the first thing Daniel and Greg would see when they arrived. The days leading up to their arrival were oddly quiet. Daniel mentioned Greg a few times, casually referring to the arrangements he'd made, but he didn't press me for input. That suited me just fine. I kept my answers short and polite, hiding my growing anticipation behind a calm facade. Lauren checked in every day, equal parts amused and excited. "I wish I could see their faces when they read that letter," she said during one of our phone calls. "Do you think Daniel will even understand what he did wrong?" I sighed, running my fingers over the new keys in my pocket. "Honestly? Probably not. But that's not the point. This isn't about him getting it. It's about me standing up for myself. Finally, the day arrived. Daniel had texted me earlier that morning to let me know they'd be at the house around 6 p.m. "Make sure everything's ready for Greg," he wrote, as though I were some kind of hotel concierge. I rolled my eyes and set about putting the finishing touches on my plan. The house was spotless, the guest room perfectly mediocre, and the letter taped firmly to the door. I felt a mix of nerves and anticipation as the clock ticked closer to 6. For years, I'd let Daniel's behavior slide, convincing myself that it wasn't worth the fight. But this time, I was ready. When I heard the car pull into the driveway, my heart pounded in my chest. I stood near the kitchen, out of sight but close enough to hear everything. I didn't need to see their faces to know the moment they read the letter. Daniel's voice carried loud and clear. "What the hell is this?" he barked, his tone a mix of confusion and anger. "Looks like a letter," Greg said, his voice quieter. "Maybe you should read it." I held my breath as silence fell over the house, the weight of my words sinking in. What the hell is this supposed to mean? Daniel's voice roared through the house as the front door slammed shut. I stayed in the kitchen, letting the words linger in the air. I wanted him to read the letter fully, to stew in the implications before I made my entrance. "What's going on?" Greg's voice followed, quieter but tinged with awkward concern. "Should I leave? I don't want to cause problems." "Oh, you're not leaving," Daniel said angrily, his voice rising. "This is my house too, and nobody gets to make rules without me." I walked out of the kitchen then, calm and collected, as though I'd just finished reading a book. "Oh, hi, Daniel, Greg." My tone was so casual, it threw both of them off for a moment. "I see you found the letter." Daniel turned to me, the crumpled paper still in his hand. "What is this?" he demanded, shaking it at me. "What are you trying to pull?" "I'm not trying to pull anything," I said, folding my arms. "I'm just reminding you that this is our home, and I'm not going to stand by while you treat me like a guest in my own space." Greg stepped back slightly, looking more uncomfortable by the second. "Hey, Julia, if this is a bad time, I can—" "No, Greg," I said, cutting him off but softening my tone. "This isn't your fault. You're just caught in the middle of something Daniel should have handled differently." "Handled differently?" Daniel snapped, his face turning red. "You're the one handling this poorly. Changing the locks? Rearranging the house? What are you even doing?" "I'm making a point," I said firmly. "For years, you've made decisions that affect both of us without consulting me. This house was supposed to be our fresh start, Daniel. But instead, you've turned it into a dumping ground for everyone else's problems. And when I asked you to talk to me about it, you told me your decision was final." "Because it is," he said, doubling down. "Greg's my best friend. He needed a place to stay, and I'm not going to apologize for helping him. And I'm not going to apologize for standing up for myself," I shot back, my voice steady but laced with steel. "If Greg stays here, it's going to be under my terms, not yours." Greg held up his hands, trying to de-escalate. "Guys, look, maybe this isn't the best time for me to move in. I don't want to be the reason you two are fighting." Daniel rounded on him, his frustration spilling over. "No, Greg, you're staying. Julia's just overreacting. She'll get over it." "I won't," I said flatly, causing both men to freeze. "This isn't something I'll get over. You've ignored me, dismissed me, and taken me for granted for years, Daniel. This time, I'm drawing the line." Daniel laughed bitterly, gesturing toward the guest room. "So what? You're going to keep me out of my own house? Good luck with that." I stepped closer, meeting his gaze head-on. "It's not just your house, Daniel. It's mine too. And unless you're willing to treat me like an equal partner, maybe you should be the one leaving." The room went silent. Greg shifted awkwardly, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Daniel looked at me like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. For the first time in years, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. "You're serious," he said finally, his voice quieter. "I've never been more serious," I replied. "You've taken me for granted for too long, Daniel. If you want this to work, you're going to have to start listening to me. If not, I'll be fine on my own. Greg cleared his throat, breaking the tension. Julia, he said hesitantly, I think I should leave. This isn't my fight. You're right, I said, turning to him. It isn't. And I'm sorry you got caught in the middle of this. But this isn't about you, Greg. It's about boundaries. I hope you understand. Greg nodded, grabbing his bag and the dog's leash. I'll figure something else out, he said, shooting a meaningful look at Daniel. Take care of this man. Seriously. As Greg walked out the door, Daniel and I were left standing in the entryway, the tension between us thick and heavy. This is ridiculous, he muttered, pacing back and forth. All this over Greg staying here for a little while? It's not just about Greg, I said, my voice softening slightly. It's about how you treat me. You didn't ask me. You didn't consider my feelings. You just assumed I'd go along with whatever you decided. That's not a partnership, Daniel. He stopped pacing, his shoulders slumping slightly. I didn't think it was a big deal, he admitted, his tone begrudging. I thought you'd understand. Well, I didn't, I said, standing firm. And if we're going to move forward, that has to change. No more unilateral decisions. No more dismissing me. I'm your wife, not a tenant in your house. Daniel didn't say anything for a long time. He just stood there, staring at the letter still crumpled in his hand. Finally, he nodded, his voice barely audible. I get it. Do you? I asked, my tone skeptical. He looked up at me, his expression tired but sincere. I do. I don't want to lose you, Julia. I nodded slowly, then start acting like it. The house felt eerily quiet after Greg left. His dog's absence, the bag he had dragged out the door, and the awkward final exchange lingered in the air. Daniel sat on the couch, his head in his hands, as if the weight of the evening was finally catching up to him. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the one who had to fix it. I busied myself in the kitchen, putting away the glasses and tidying up, mostly to give myself space to think. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew I'd said everything I needed to say. Daniel's reaction was his to process. I wasn't going to carry the burden of it for him. After a few minutes, he came into the kitchen, his footsteps slow and deliberate. Julia, he said, his voice softer than I'd expected. I want to talk. I turned to face him, leaning against the counter. I'm listening. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking anywhere but at me. I was wrong, he said finally. About Greg, about the way I've been treating you. I've been selfish. I didn't even think about how this would make you feel. For a moment, I didn't respond. I wanted to believe him, but I'd heard apologies before. Do you understand why I'm upset? I asked carefully. I think so, he said, his brow furrowed. It's not just about Greg moving in. It's about how I handled it, how I didn't handle it with you. I made it seem like your opinion didn't matter, and that's not okay. I nodded slowly. No, it's not. He sighed, his shoulders slumping. I've always been the kind of guy who makes decisions quickly. I didn't realize how much that was hurting us. You've had years to realize it, I said, my tone firm but not unkind. And I've had years of being dismissed and overlooked. That stops now, Daniel. If you can't change, if we can't be partners, I won't stay. His face tightened at my words, but he didn't argue. Instead, he nodded. You're right. I don't want to lose you, Julia. I know I've messed up, but I want to do better. That night, we slept in separate rooms. It wasn't out of anger, but because I needed time to process what had happened. For years, I'd carried the weight of Daniel's decisions, sacrificing my voice and my comfort for the sake of our marriage. Standing up for myself felt good, liberating even, but it also left me questioning whether things would ever truly change. I replayed the events of the evening over and over in my mind. Greg's quiet departure, Daniel's outburst, and finally, his attempt to take responsibility. Was it genuine? Could he really change after all this time? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going back to the way things were. In the days that followed, Daniel made an effort. He started asking me about decisions, small ones, like where to go for dinner, and bigger ones, like how we'd divide responsibilities at home. It wasn't perfect, and I could tell it wasn't easy for him, but it was a start. For the first time in years, I felt like we might actually be partners. As for me, I began focusing on what made me happy. I redecorated parts of the house to reflect my own tastes, adding personal touches that made the space feel like mine again. I spent more time with Lauren, catching up over coffee and laughing about the chaos of the past few weeks. Slowly but surely, I started to feel like myself again, stronger, more confident, and less willing to settle for anything less than what I deserved. A month later, the house felt like a completely different place, not because of the decor or the layout, but because of the energy. It was quieter, more balanced, and for the first time in years, it felt like my home. I'd spent weeks reclaiming my space, not just physically but emotionally, and that effort had paid off. Daniel had taken the confrontation to heart. He started therapy, not because I'd asked him to, but because he recognized that his behavior needed to change. He admitted one evening over dinner that he hadn't realized how much his decisions had alienated me, how his assumption that we'd figure it out had really meant, "You'll adjust." "I didn't respect you the way I should have," he said, his tone quiet but sincere. "I thought I was being a good husband by handling things on my own, but I see now that I wasn't. I was just shutting you out." It wasn't easy to hear him admit those things. A part of me wanted to scream, "Why did it take this long?" But I also knew that change wasn't instant. For the first time in our marriage, Daniel was putting in the work, and I appreciated that. It didn't erase the years of frustration, but it was a start. As for me, I'd found my voice again. The version of me that had been buried under years of compromise and silence was finally coming back to life. I set boundaries, clear, firm, and unapologetic ones, and Daniel respected them. When he asked about having Greg over for dinner one weekend, I appreciated that he phrased it as a question, not an assumption. "Dinner sounds fine," I told him, "but just dinner, not a sleepover. And Greg can leave the dog at home." He nodded. "Of course, thanks for agreeing." It was a small moment, but it felt like a win. Lauren noticed the change too. Over coffee one morning, she leaned back in her chair, grinning. "You look lighter," she said, "happier." "I feel lighter," I admitted. "For the first time in a long time, I'm not tiptoeing around him. I know what I want, and I'm not afraid to say it anymore." She raised her cup in a toast. "To finally taking up space." "To not settling for less," I said, clinking my cup against hers. There were still days when I doubted whether things would last, whether Daniel's efforts would hold. But I knew one thing for sure. I'd never lose myself in a relationship again. The person who stood at the kitchen counter, calmly delivering an ultimatum to her husband, wasn't going anywhere.